And happy Tuesday morning to you, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. This is installment number 5 in our examination of John Hagee and his predictions concerning the 4 blood moons. He assured us from April of 2014 until September 2015, something big was about to happen. Something earth-shattering was about to happen. Well, I don't have to tell you that nothing happened. And by the way, it was supposed to happen in regard to Israel, because Israel is the focus of eschatology. Nothing happened. And not surprisingly, John Hagee has now moved on. Although he has said a few words about the 4 blood moons, basically denying that there's any significance to the fact that his predictions failed, that he created a fear environment, that he made false predictions. Well, now he's on to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, saying, obviously, the end is near. Well, I want to keep looking, at least on this segment here, of John Hagee's abuse of Acts chapter 2 in regard to the 4 blood moons. I have shared with you that he completely and totally abuses the text. Number 1, Peter in Acts chapter 2 is quoting from Joel 2 about what would happen in the last days. And Peter said, remember this, folks, if you don't get anything else out of this short series, Peter said 2,000 years ago, this is that. He did not say this is what it will be one day. He did not say this is similar to what it will be. He did not say this is similar to what Joel said. He said this is that, which was spoken by the prophet Joel. Language could not be any clearer, and that completely and totally falsifies John Hagee, who says that we were about to see, that we were living in the days of the fulfillment of Joel 2. No, Peter said he and his audience were in the days of the fulfillment of Joel 2, 2,000 years ago. Now watch this. Joel said, the sun shall be turned to darkness, the moon into blood. Now notice this very, very carefully. Before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. So, here is the outpouring of the Holy Spirit in miraculous measure, the darkening of the sun and the moon before the great and terrible day of the Lord. Well, hey, guess what? In Malachi chapter 4, 5 and 6, the Lord said, behold, I send Elijah, my prophet, who shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, hearts of the children to the fathers, before the coming of the great and the terrible day of the Lord. So, Joel predicted the outpouring of the Holy Spirit and the darkening of the sun and the moon before the great and terrible day of the Lord. Elijah was to come before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord. Well, guess what? Pardon me. According to John Hagee, between April of 2014 and September of 2015, we were supposed to see the darkening of the sun and the 4 blood moons as a sign of the great and terrible day of the Lord. Now hang with me here. He said not one word about the appearance of Elijah. And yet, God himself said, not only would the sun be dark and the moon be turned to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord, he said, I send Elijah before the great and the terrible day of the Lord. Folks, you can't have the 4 blood moons as a sign of the great and terrible day of the Lord, and there's no proof whatsoever that the turning of the moon into blood was the tetrad that John Hagee was talking about? None. I've already shared with you what I believe that is. But be that as it may, you cannot divide, you cannot divorce the outpouring of the Holy Spirit and the blood and fire and the vapor of smoke, the sun being dark and the moon being turned into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord. You can't divide that from the appearance of Elijah. Did John Hagee ever say one single word about Elijah being present between April of 2014 and September of 2015? Not one word. Now look, if literal, physical Elijah was going to be resurrected, as the Jews believed he would, and appear and proclaim the great and terrible day of the Lord, then that would have been a real sign. I mean, after all, you got a man resurrected from the dead, walking around, proclaiming the end is near. It didn't happen, and you know it didn't happen. So, the conflation between the miraculous outpouring of the Holy Spirit, the blood, the fire, the vapor of smoke, before the great and terrible day of the Lord, must be joined with Malachi chapter 4, 5, and 6, and the appearance of Elijah before the coming of the great and the terrible day of the Lord. And Elijah was not present. Therefore, John Hagee abused, distorted, and ignored, really, the biblical testimony. And in our next segment, I'm going to show you how badly he missed that by showing you when Elijah came. All right? Hey, don't forget, get a copy of my book, The Last Days Identified. You will see a lot about the appearance of Elijah. Go to my website, eschatology.org, BibleProphecy.com, order the book, say that you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping, and that will save you almost $5. Hey, thanks so much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. Don't forget, the next segment, the coming of Elijah before the great and the terrible day of the Lord. You don't want to miss that. We'll see you on the flip side.